Welcome to another update from Global Markets Research. Together with me is Enver, our ASEAN Economist, and we will be discussing the implications of the European Union's Deforestation-Free law for Indonesia. The European Union regulation on deforestation-free products came into force on 29 June 2023 that mandates companies placing certain commodities on the EU market to screen their global suppliers through mandatory deforestation and forest degradation due diligence frameworks. A key driver is that the EU is a major consumer of commodities associated with deforestation and forest degradation for agricultural land expansion. The 6 commodities covered by the regulation are palm oil, cattle, soy, coffee, cocoa, and timber and rubber, as well as derived products such as beef, leather, chocolate, and furniture. The EUDR aims to increase the consumption of deforestation-free products, limit the EU's impact on global deforestation, and reduce EU-driven greenhouse gas emissions and biodiversity loss. Under the EUDR, companies that export or place these commodities on the EU market must prove that the products originated from land that has not been subject to deforestation or forest degradation after 31st December 2020. All relevant companies will need to conduct strict due diligence to ensure that the products comply with regulations, including those surrounding human rights, or face penalties for non-compliance. There is a transition period of 18 months from 29 June 2023 for large companies to comply with the EUDR, while small enterprises will have up to 24 months to adapt. The EU estimates that there will be a reduction of at least 31.9 million metric tons of carbon emissions annually from the EU consumption and production of the targeted commodities. That translates to at least 3.2 billion euros of economic savings annually. So Enver, as Indonesia is the world's leading palm oil exporter and a major supplier of other commodities like rubber and timber, can you tell us more about the impact of the EUDR on Indonesia's exports and stakeholders?
Yeah, definitely, Shu Yi. So as you rightly said, Indonesia is a major producer of these products, especially for palm oil. And not only Indonesia is the world's largest producer, but it's also the world's largest exporter. It is worth noting that Indonesia exports to the EU have been on a rising trend. Based on our calculation, the EUDR will impact approximately $5.9 billion worth of Indonesia's exports, which accounts for about 40% of Indonesia's total exports to the EU. To be sure, this only represents about 2.9% of Indonesia's total exports. The impact of the EUDR perhaps is more profound when we consider how it could affect the lives of farmers, especially the small-scale farmers and the smallholders. These farmers may not have the sufficient resources to comply with the strict regulatory requirements, and it is estimated that around 15 to 17 million of small farmers who contributed to about 34% of Indonesia's total palm oil productions will be affected. So the number is quite significant. So the Indonesian government has made several efforts to address these issues, one of which is by lobbying the EU to recognize the domestically recognized palm oil sustainability standards, such as in Indonesia, for example, we have the Indonesia Sustainable Palm Oil, or we call the ISPO, and the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil. Additionally, there are existing programs like the Smallholders Training Program that support small-scale farmers in accessing financing, replacing aging palms, and managing their plantations while meeting the certification standards. However, we must also be mindful, I think, to the challenges in integrating smallholders into the sustainable palm oil supply chain, because there are challenges like still the lack of technical knowledge, limited access to planting materials, and even financing.
The list of commodities covered under the EUDR is expected to be reviewed and updated regularly while it considers new deforestation drivers and emerging trends. Which other sectors in Indonesia do you think will be affected by the EUDR in the future?
So apart from palm oil, cocoa, soy, cattle, timber, rubber, as you mentioned earlier, I think there is a potential for the EU to expand its scope in the future to include products that essentially contribute to deforestation. This could even include mining activities, which, if materialized, should warrant some attention. because Indonesia is the largest producer of nickel and has significant reserves of other critical minerals such as copper, bauxite, and tin. With the growing electric vehicle sector, the demand for nickel is expected to increase, as it is crucial for component for EV batteries. Currently, these commodities are not included in the EUDR regulation, but as we mentioned earlier, the covered commodities will be regularly viewed and updated. So it will be interesting to keep an eye on any potential challenges. Yeah.
Moving forward, what are some other developments and trends that we can expect?
So there are interesting developments taking place now that I think worth looking into. First, there is the EUDR benchmarking system, which would assess the risk of non-compliance by exporting countries. A low-risk country will be subject to simplified due diligence, but high-risk countries will be subject to a more comprehensive check. There is a risk that Indonesia may be labeled as a more of the latter rather than the former. Increase in operational costs is to be expected, especially related to compliance costs associated with tracing the complexity of the supply chains. Third, there is a risk that the EUDR could transform trade and supply chains across commodities associated with deforestation. In the short term, it may encourage some businesses that struggle to comply with the EUDR to seek markets elsewhere. But this perhaps also depend on how the EU receptive to locally recognized palm oil sustainability standards, as well as supporting smallholders in exporting to the EU. And lastly, it will be worth tracking how the ad hoc joint task force consisting Indonesia, Malaysia, and EU could address issues related to the EUDR implementation. We think that the formation of this task force is a positive step towards addressing the structural challenges within the industry, and if executed properly, it could lay a strong foundation for future sustainability policy initiatives and perhaps partnerships.